Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And today we are going to talk about Morojo and the history of cosplay. This episode is sponsored by Folkwear Patterns. Are you inspired by what you learn about on Handmade History? Ready to bring those techniques into your own sewing room? At Folkwear, we specialize in authentic sewing patterns for historic and folk clothing from around the world. Whether you're dreaming of an Edwardian bodice, a traditional dirndl, or an 18th century working dress, we have meticulously researched patterns that honor the original garment and construction methods. Plus, nearly every pattern includes options for traditional embellishments, from delicate embroidery to lace insertion, so you can create pieces that truly capture the spirit of their time and place. Visit folkwear.com, that's FOLKWEAR.com, and use code HANDMADE20 for 20% off your purchase. This code is good through the end of 2025. Folkwear, where history meets your hands. Thank you, Folkwear.
Thank you, Folkwear.
So, I have been saving today's episode for a Halloween episode, and if you are listening to this when it airs, it is October 20th. And we are going to talk about cosplay and the mother of cosplay, Morojo, along with other people who have made cosplay into what it is today. Sonia, want to kick us off?
Yeah, so what is cosplay? Cosplay is a portmanteau, two words combined, of costume and play. It refers to people who dress up, often as their favorite characters from media, such as books, movies, TV series, comic books, and manga. It is a way of participating in many fandoms, which are subcultures devoted to particular media. Teresa Winge, a researcher, writes that there are 4 elements of cosplay: the cosplayer or person dressing up, the social setting, which is often a con or conference, the character or role that the person is playing, and the costume itself. The word cosplay was coined in the 1980s in Japan by a Japanese writer named Nobuyuki, also known as Nove, Takahashi. The word he created was cosplay, which in English we call Japanglish, and in Japanese is called wasei-eigo. This is a word that is borrowed from English, but absorbed into Japanese and sometimes shortened. Takahashi wrote an article for a magazine called My Anime in June 1983, where he showcased the costumes that people wore at a con in Tokyo for self-published comics called Comiket, which is a portmanteau of comic market. As we will see, sci-fi and comic book conventions love a portmanteau. Takahashi's article showcased a variety of elaborate costumes, including robots, superheroes, and other characters from different anime and manga. It also included a special section on female cosplayers who cosplayed as male characters. The word cosplay was absorbed back into English as cosplay, and now it is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
The earliest official cosplay was documented in 1939 at the World Science Fiction Convention. The convention was held in New York in Caravan Hall at 110 East 59th Street in Manhattan. Later, this convention was nicknamed Nikon. This was not the first science fiction convention, but it was close to it. The first National Science Fiction Convention was held in Newark, New Jersey on May 29, 1938. Over 100 science fiction authors and fans attended. Scientifictionist, as fans were sometimes called, Joe Kennedy, wrote about the Slovak Sokol Hall where it was held. He said, "Not the least attractive feature of Slovak Sokol Hall was the fact that it rented for $3. The proprietor allowed this low rent in the expectation of getting business for his bar downstairs. Little did he realize that the upper lips of fully half the club's membership bore less fuzz than a peach. Many a sober speech on the place of science fiction in the modern world was drowned out by the thumping strains of a polka wafting upward, accompanied by legions of boots clomping the barroom floor." And why am I including this minor detail which has little bearing on the history of cosplay? Because we grew up in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
New York gets all the glory, but we were the first.
Classic.
Seriously. So back to our story. Nikon was held the next year, July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, in conjunction with the New York World's Fair. The program for the event said, quote, "Hello, gang. Welcome to the World Science Fiction Convention. If you do not have a wonderful time here, it will be your own fault." The program included ads from publications like Weird Tales, a well-known sci-fi magazine that we mentioned in our episode on zines, episode 13. Over 100 readers, fans, authors, editors, and, quote, science hobbyists were at the con, and attendees included Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury.
That's cool. Another attendee was a sci-fi fan named Morojo. She was listed in the program under scientifictionist. Morojo created 2 costumes for the con. One was a dress for herself, which converted into a cape and romper outfit. Based on photos, it seems as though the skirt could be removed and tied around her shoulders as a cape. The other was a costume for her friend, Forrest J. Ackerman, which included pants, a shirt with his nickname, 4SJ, on the front, along with a vest and cape. Morojo called these costumes clothes of the future, and Ackerman called them Futura costumes. The costumes were probably inspired by the movie Things to Come, which came out in 1936. There are photos from the event, and the costumes are mentioned in sci-fi scenes.
So let's rewind a little bit and talk about Morojo. Morojo was born Myrtle Rebecca Douglas on June 20th, 1904 in Phoenix, Arizona. She became interested in science fiction after her brother gave her a copy of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Princess of Mars. She moved to Los Angeles and became very active in the sci-fi community there, and she also became interested in Esperanto. And in case you don't know, Esperanto is a, quote, neutral working language according to the organization Esperanto USA. It was created in 1887 by Dr. L.L. Zamanoff of Warsaw, Poland, and its goal is to, quote, foster international understanding by allowing people with different native languages to communicate as equals. It has no silent letters and is relatively easy for most people to learn and to pronounce.
Morojo's nickname came from Esperanto in the sci-fi community. Mo and Ro are the names of the letters M and R in Esperanto. And Yo, spelled J-O, is the name of the letter J. So Morojo's nickname is essentially MRJ in Esperanto. The J comes from her friend Forrest J. Ackerman. Morojo and Ackerman worked together for 10 years. Ackerman himself was a big character in the world of sci-fi fandom. He spoke in this weird combination of Esperanto and abbreviated English that he and others called Ackermanese. Morojo and Ackerman worked on zines together, including Voice of the Imagination, which had over 50 issues. When they worked together, they signed their name Myrta Forsto, which is Esperanto for Myrtle Forest.
Morojo also had her own zine called Gutetto, which was in Esperanto and which you can read online. She helped write Fancyclopedia number 1, which was a history of the sci-fi world. And Fancyclopedia number 3 is online now, and it was very useful in this research. Morojo held many politically liberal views. She opposed the Exclusion Act, which, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, was the first and only law to suspend immigration based on nationality. It ended the immigration of Chinese people to the U.S. in 1882 and was repealed in 1943. One of Morojo's favorite books was Ayn Rand's Anthem, a dystopian novel set in the future about the loss of individualism. In the Who's Who of Fandom in 1940, Morojo's entry, which she probably wrote herself, is as follows. Quote, small, dark, and moody, age over 21. Esperantist, idealist, discontented with the present, dreams of the future. Collection consists of 400 pro mags, Ackerman, a few books, and a great number of MISC fan mags. Morojo was married 3 times and had 1 son. She and Ackerman were never married, and they had a falling out that seems to have rocked the sci-fi community, and she died at the age of 64 in California.
Morojo and others made costumes after 1939. In 1940 at ChiCon, which was held in Chicago, she and Ackerman did a skit from Things to Come. Skits are part of modern cosplay competitions today. In 1941 at Denvention, held in Denver, she wore a frog mask made by Ray Harryhausen. Ray Harryhausen later became well known for his stop-motion animation special effects. His last film was Clash of the Titans, which came out in 1981.
I actually watched that in school.
I don't think I did.
I remember there was an owl that was probably one of these stop-motion special effects. So, yeah.
In 1946, at Pacificon in LA, she went dressed as a character called Snake Mother. She also inspired other people to make costumes. This wasn't called cosplay yet. Instead, it was called masquerade. People's costumes weren't super elaborate compared to today's, but they were creative, handmade, and even hand-sewn. Possibly the first costume contest, called a masquerade contest, was held at Norwest Con in Portland, Oregon in 1950.
Another super cool costume was made by Lee Hoffman a few years later. Hoffman was a sci-fi fan who had her own zine, Quandary, spelled Quandry. It included stories, poems, and other sci-fi content by herself and others. And I thought I would share one of her poems, which it was in the first issue of Quandary. It's called Tomorrow. I saw tomorrow rise from the cosmic as Lazarus rose from the dead. I saw the spaceships and the comets circling over his head. I felt the surging strength that flowed as blood flowed through his veins, and knew that he would travel through distant unknown lanes. I felt that I could be there and travel them with him, but as I stood and wondered, the glorious image grew dim, and in a sudden microsecond, the vision faded away. I stood alone on a desolate plain, with nothing to touch but today. Hoffman cosplayed as her own zine at a con in 1952. She wrote about it in her memoir, In and Out of Quandary, which I found quoted in an article on Lady Science. Hoffman wrote, quote, "The World Con in Chicago was to have a masquerade, so I mimeographed myself a costume. Quandary appeared on paper in various pastel colors, so I located some plain cotton fabric in similar colors, cut out pieces the size of pages, and ran them through the mimeo, then stitched them together into a tunic that I wore over slacks. I accessorized it with a belt of paper clips and a mimeo stylus with a pin back glued on." I saw a picture of it, and it was very cool looking.
So, sci-fi culture and conventions grew throughout the 50s and 60s, as did cosplay. Photos from the cons in the 60s show people in costumes that you might see today. Lots of stretch garments and sparkles, elaborate hats and helmets, bodysuits, capes, tights, and tulle. Also elaborate hair and makeup. By the mid-60s, Japanese animation became available in the US. Japanese animation, sometimes called Japanimation or more commonly anime, had a big influence on cosplay. One of the first anime cartoons widely available was Astro Boy. Karen Schalbel may have made and worn the first anime costume in the US when she dressed as Captain Harlock, another manga series and character in the 1970s. Starship Yamato was another popular series that people dressed up for.
Yes, I saw a group photo of cosplayers as Starship Yamato characters from this time.
Even back then, TV and movie producers recognized the power of the con. Gene Roddenberry premiered the pilot of Star Trek at the 24th TriCon in Cleveland, Ohio, in September of 1966.
In the 70s, sci-fi and fantasy were still very much outside the mainstream. However, cons were held in hotels in large and mid-sized cities around the country. San Diego Comic-Con was started in 1970. It would become one of the biggest cons in the country. Another interesting con was started in 1977. WisCon, held February 11th through 13th in Madison, Wisconsin, was established as a science fiction convention with a feminist/social justice focus, according to their website. The first con had about 200 attendees. Now attendance is typically around 800 people. Guests of honor at the first con included Catherine McLean, a sci-fi writer, and Amanda Bankier, who published a sci-fi zine called The Witch and the Chameleon. Octavia Butler was a guest of honor in 1980. George R.R. Martin attended in 1988, and Ursula K. Le Guin in 1996. And the con has been online the past couple of years, but will be in person next year.
During this time, there was one famous cosplayer, Wendy Pini. Pini, who was born Wendy Fletcher, was a fan of Japanese anime from the age of 10. She began cosplaying at 16 and started working as a comic book illustrator when she was 19. Wendy met Richard Pini when Wendy wrote into a comics magazine, which at the time published the addresses of people who wrote in. They corresponded via mail and eventually got married. Wendy Pini appeared on TV on The Mike Douglas Show, a talk show that did a segment on adults who read comic books. Phil Soling, a direct marketer who sold comic books, told Mike Douglas that he would bring a superhero onto the next show. Douglas did not expect to see Pini come on stage dressed as Red Sonja, a superhero who has long red hair who wears a metal bikini.
The Pinis wrote and illustrated their own comic, ElfQuest, which was called, quote, the first American manga because of Wendy's illustrating style. In an interview, Wendy said that, quote, "One of the things we're most proud of is that we brought in a large female audience, which no other comic at the time had done." Because of her own background as a cosplayer, Wendy drew the costumes of her own characters very thoughtfully, making them easy to replicate in real life. People loved to cosplay the elves from ElfQuest, and Wendy remembered going to the San Diego Comic-Con in 1981, where two groups of ElfQuest cosplayers gathered, totaling about 80 people. She said, "You couldn't even turn and look anywhere without seeing an elf." Wendy loves seeing people cosplay her characters. She said, "Some of the best feedback you can get as a creator is when the fans show your characters back to you, and when you see that not only do they get it, but that they incorporate it into their own persona and their own creativity, and that never ever gets old." And the Pinis published ElfQuest for 40 years.
Comic-Cons grew through the 80s and 90s. In the 80s, Japanese culture influenced cosplay in a big way through visual kei. This was a musical movement that was like glam rock plus manga, which are Japanese comics. Musicians wore elaborate costumes on stage. They had colorful hair and intense makeup, and they played with gender and appearance. Visual kei is still part of Japanese music. Yoshiki is a modern famous visual kei star, and he eventually became a superhero in a comic called Blood Red Dragon, created by Stan Lee in 2011. Cosplay grew dramatically in popularity. CostumeCon was founded in 1983. The idea was conceived by Adrienne Martine Barnes and other attendees at Denvention in 1981. Karen Schnabelt wrote about this for the CostumeCon 7 program book. She said, quote, "The demand for costume programming was demonstrated when the How I Made My Masquerade costume panel ran over its time limit and continued informally in the hotel hallways after another panel took the room. As Bio Trimble, another cosplayer, put it, quote, costume fandom became sentient at Denvention too." The International Costumers Guild was formed in 1989. They honored Morojo as the mother of convention costuming in 2016.
Still, in every decade we've talked about so far, cosplay and cons were outside of mainstream culture. This was still true in the 80s and early 90s. Yaya Han, a famous cosplayer we're going to talk about in a minute, talks about growing up at this time. She says, "It was us versus everybody else." However, cons got their first big bump in attendance in the 90s. In the mid-90s, Sailor Moon became popular. This anime series centers on a female teenage superhero. It was widely available, and I remember seeing it, though I can't remember if we checked it out on video or if it was on TV. Did you ever watch this, Sonia?
No, I don't think so. But I remember, I know what it is.
Yeah. Sailor Moon brought a lot of girls to cons because it was difficult to find other fans in real life. If you imagine now you're a teenage girl and you discover a new thing, you go online and easily find all kinds of other people who like that thing, either on social media or in online communities. But pre-internet, cons were one of the only places to meet fellow fans. As an example of the growth in cons at this time, Anime Expo started in 1992 in Anaheim, California. In its first year, there were about 1,750 attendees. Attendance grew slowly through the early 90s. By 1995, it had doubled. But from 1996 onward, roughly 1,000 new fans attended each year. And in 1999, 6,400 people attended Anime Expo.
Cons and cosplay became much more popular in the early 2000s. They began to be part of the mainstream. Attendance at the San Diego Comic-Con grew gradually up to 50,000 in the 90s, but it jumped from 50,000 to 120,000 from 2000 to 2006. Big sci-fi and fantasy franchises brought in new fans, including Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. Another huge driver in Comic-Con attendance was Twilight, the trilogy about teenage vampires. The first movie was released in 2008. The franchise had a big presence at San Diego Comic-Con in 2009. Kristen Stewart, Robert Pattinson, Taylor Lautner, and other actors were there, along with director Chris Weitz, and they previewed clips from the second Twilight movie, New Moon.
Fun fact, when New Moon was released, it broke box office records. It beat out Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince for midnight showings. It had the best opening day in history, outselling The Dark Knight, which was a Batman movie. And 80% of the audience was girls and women. An article in Variety said its success was driven by the, quote, ferocious appetite for the franchise among girls and younger women. And Sonia, I remember going with you and our other sister to Forks, Washington, And I had you to tell me the entire Twilight story because I hadn't read them, but you two had.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, we were already in Washington. We didn't just go to Fort Washington, but we were in Seattle. But
Did
yeah,
you
no, we read the books.
did you have a ferocious appetite for the franchise?
I read the books. I don't think I saw the movies.
Oh,
I
interesting.
probably saw the first one.
Wow. All this to say, Comic-Cons such as the ones in San Diego and New York now regularly have six-figure attendance.
So let's talk about cosplay today. When anime came to the US in a big way in the 90s, and cons like Anime Expo began, Japanese fans also attended. We mentioned at the top of the episode that the word cosplay was created by a Japanese journalist, Nove Takahashi, in 1983. Japanese fans were already cosplaying in elaborate costumes by then. When they came to the US in the 90s, American fans saw their great costumes and were inspired to find better materials and make more elaborate designs. The internet helped share ideas, methods, and materials with more fans, and cosplay grew over the next 2 decades into the enormous multi-billion-dollar industry it is today.
Now, cosplaying can be a career, not just a fun weekend hobby. Cosplayers work in the cosplay industry by making custom costumes or accessories for fellow cosplayers, or by teaching people how to make their own costumes. Famous cosplayers sell prints of themselves and meet with fans. They are hired by franchises to advertise movies, series, and video games, and they also act as influencers and partner with brands to sell to their huge online audiences. These brands might be specialty fabric or notion companies, tool manufacturers, or others. And how did this happen? The cosplay community grew and companies began to take notice. Cosplayers also looked for new opportunities. Materials and methods improved, and cosplayers were able to make even more amazing costumes. And the internet allowed expert cosplayers and innovators such as Svetlana Quint to share their methods online.
One cosplayer who was instrumental in paving the way for professional cosplay was Yaya Han. Han was born in China but grew up in Germany. She became a fan of anime as a child, and she emigrated to the US when she was a teenager. She began cosplaying at Anime Expo in 1999, and Han began doing a photo shoot every time she cosplayed. She said in a documentary, Cosplay Universe, that she had a friend who was a photography student who took her pictures. And she attributed some of her early popularity to her friend's skill. It helped her stand out from other, more amateur photos. Han's costumes are incredible, with lots of embellishment and details. Soon, people began commissioning her to create costumes for them. Han had been working as a software engineer, but she eventually quit this job to focus on cosplay. And she started to make cosplay accessories and sell them at cons. And her business took off with cat ear headbands.
Han became the first cosplayer to navigate the retail industry. She partnered with big names in the craft industry in the 2010s. Beginning in 2015, she released over 30 patterns through McCall's Pattern Company. In 2016, she partnered with Joanne to create her own line of fabrics, which are now available in Michaels and Mood Fabric since Joanne has closed. R.I.P. Joanne. Han's fabric lines include four-way stretch and specialty fabrics like faux leather and shiny metallic prints that are useful in recreating the wide variety of characters people like to cosplay. She also has her own branded sewing machine, the Burnett B79 Yaya Han edition, sold by Bernina. She has other partnerships with trim and notions companies, specialty foam manufacturers, toolmakers like Dremel, and others. She also goes to dozens of conventions each year where she speaks on panels and does meet and greets with fans. She still creates her own costumes. She said in the documentary that if she ever stopped making her own costumes, she would quit because that is the part she loves. And Han was featured on Marvel's reboot of The Scarlet Witch. Dressed as her own version of the Scarlet Witch, Han appeared on the comic book's cover. I thought that was pretty cool. She was also going to have a comic based on her published by Lionsgate called Wondrous 2, the Yaya Han saga, and I would really like to find this, but I don't think it was ever made. I have not been able to find it in real life. Through these partnerships and others, Han paved the way for numerous other cosplayers to create businesses for themselves in this rapidly growing universe.
And we'll finish with some quotes from cosplayers. Han says in her book, Yaya Han's World of Cosplay, that, quote, cosplay has become a global phenomenon, a lifestyle, and an artistic industry. She says that cosplay blends fandom, creativity, and entertainment into a unique phenomenon. Dr. Andrea Letamendi, a cosplayer and psychologist, says, quote, "You are a power that is stronger and bigger than yourself when you're in a costume." Ejin Chuang, the author of Cosplay in America, says that cosplay is, quote, "a way of finding out who we are." And finally, Chima, another cosplayer creator, says, quote, "I feel the most badass when I'm making stuff." And I think that's something we can all relate to. So that was cosplay. Alicia, what did you think?
Turning the tables. Well, I was fascinated by the early cosplayers. I love the idea of making a costume that looks like your zine. I think that is just like the most amazing costume.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea how big cosplay was and how it really like took off quickly.
Yeah, I didn't realize, because I think of it as a pretty modern thing, which I guess like in the grand scheme of things it is, but that it was so popular back in the 30s is interesting. Think of like Marvel, they always do like the big releases at these cons and everything. They'll be like the next.
Yeah.
But then they're like doing that for Star Trek too. And I'm like, oh, that's
I know.
yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And like Star Trek became like it's such an icon. It was like what, a few seasons, and it's such iconic costuming.
It's true.
It's kind of fun.
I can't believe that the pilot was debuted at a con. I think of Comic Cons starting like after Star Trek, but that is not what happened.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening. A huge thank you to our sponsor, Folkwear Patterns. Visit folkwear.com and use code handmade20 for 20% off your purchase through the end of 2025. Folkwear, where history meets your hands.
You can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, that's HOSTS@gmail.com. And check out our website, handmadehistorypodcast.com. Bye.
Bye.
If you are listening to this when it airs, it is October 22nd. Nope, it's not. It's October 20th. I just double checked.